You're tuning into the Active Mom Podcast with physical therapist Dr. Carrie Pagliano, a real mom's guide to all things postpartum return to workouts after baby. If you're a postpartum mom, coach, trainer, or physical therapist looking for answers on how to get back to running, CrossFit, yoga, Pilates, HIIT, you name it, without the fear of pelvic floor issues or doing something wrong, this is the podcast for you. Let's start the show. All right. So our next guest is a returning guest to the show, Amy Leedham. She goes by Amy the Punisher on Instagram. We initially had her on, if you want to check out her last episode in on May 27th, 2022. And it was right after, I guess you'd had your first. And since then, a few years under the bridge here, you've gone on and had another baby. And this experience has been a little bit different. And so we thought you'd have you on to chat about kind of the last couple of years and where you are now and what you've learned and all that good fun stuff. So Amy Leedham, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm excited to be back. I feel like sometimes these chats are kind of like therapeutic because the questions force me to think back and consider kind of
Yeah.
what has been going on, when sometimes I think as moms we just like forge ahead and don't always
Right.
take the time to reflect. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right. So for those of you that have not listened to that first episode, Amy, can you give us like the 90-second version of kind of your COVID pregnancy and what happened afterwards?
Yeah, so I had my first child in July of 2020, which means I went through kind of the whole second half of my first pregnancy in like early and peak COVID. Prior to that, I was a somewhat professional trail runner. And so kind of came into my pregnancy feeling like I was strong and fit and kind of could like coast through it and be fine. And the short version is that I was not fine. And um, I had a lot of challenges after giving birth and with returning to running. And it took me several years to even get to a point where I could kind of run consistently. And not to bury the lead, but I've really never returned at all to the same level of running. And then decided to have another kid. So
Just a few
that's kind
things
of the
in there.
short.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, and I think, going back to when we chatted last time, there was still some uncertainty kind of what was going on. And in the rear view, it's a lot easier to, I think, see certain things because there's been certain conversations that, we're having now that we weren't necessarily having back then about, looking at bone health in lactation and postpartum and kind of recognizing, some of these things. So maybe we'll talk first about that bit of time before you decided to get pregnant again. And then, the decision to get pregnant, I think, is always hard, especially when you have these, injuries post birth that really don't allow you to feel like yourself again. So maybe we can talk with those two things.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I worked with a great team of folks as I was kind of realizing that I wasn't just going to be able to do some clamshells and some 360 breathing and get back to running. Those
I
people
love that you
exist.
said that.
Those people exist. They are out there. Kudos to you. I am very envious. I think
Me too.
that's kind of what I thought it was going to be like, right? It's like
Mhm.
I will need to do some things, right? Because my body
Right.
went through a big deal, but like I'm strong, I'm resilient, I'm an athlete. Like I can do a couple things, and 9 to 12 weeks after giving birth, I'll just slowly start running and then it'll all be good. And that's not what happened. So I ended up having to do a both a little bit of an investigation and a bit of a kind of post-mortem is how it kind of felt, with a variety of folks. So I worked with Sarah Tanza, who you've had on the show,
Yep.
who's a wonderful, amazing human. She worked with me and kind of helped course correct. But I also worked with my orthopedic doctor, not a surgeon, at UCSF, who talked to me about bone health because I did develop a sacral stress fracture even well after I stopped breastfeeding. So that was an interesting,
Mm.
like, I was aware of the kind of, concerns, and it was starting to be talked about. It There wasn't nearly as much
No, not at
research,
all.
but it was
Yeah.
just kind of like, if you're breastfeeding, like, you just need to be a little bit careful. and my body didn't allow me to run the kind of mileage. But what I thought was interesting was, yeah, I developed that stress fracture kind of a year after I stopped breastfeeding, which
Wow.
is kind of interesting. Yeah. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, everyone's unique, right? And then it is
Yeah.
really true that every birth kind of story and birth recovery is different. And I think I just have a combination of some systemic imbalances from just, being an athlete for many, many years and kind of slowly building up these slight kind of body kind of asymmetries that got exacerbated by pregnancy, plus being really teeny tiny. I'm 5'2" and I have a very small abdomen area. And so just like the amount of changing that happened
Yeah.
with a relatively large baby. Um, and then I think just some like genetic, you know, uh, whatever you want to call it, with kind of breastfeeding and hypermobility,
Yep.
all came together in a perfect storm of just like really difficulties through my pelvis, and especially on my right groin were kind of the
Yeah.
big things. Um, so yeah, to kind of close that loop, after we talked, I moved to Bend, Oregon, and I started working with a new pelvic ortho PT here, who was able to get me to the point where I could run 5 days a week.
Hmm.
I got up to a long run of like 10 to 12 miles, kind of mostly okay. I did like one little race. And I was training to do Broken Arrow, which is a pretty intense mountain ultra
Hmm.
in Tahoe. Although I will say I was only training for the half marathon distance, so much shorter than I was used to, and my body still couldn't really handle that. Um,
Mm.
and so. And I ended up hurting my knee in that race anyway. And I don't know, I kind of got to this point of just like, there's still something going on here.
Yeah.
Like, I'm better, but, like, I am not anywhere near able to train like I
Right.
was before. Um, and I'm, like, 51% on the I could have another baby. It's like I got to
And that
51%,
wins.
and that one of, like, well, I'm definitely no longer a professional athlete or an elite athlete, and I think, like, not this is not like a sympathy, but, like, I think that ship sailing and, like, not
Mm.
really having that as a motivation anymore kind of tipped the scales to, like, well, then it would be awesome to have another a little human,
Yeah.
since it's not like, at this point, whatever it does to my body, I'm not gonna be a professional athlete again anyway, so,
Mm.
I'll have time to rebuild and figure stuff out and get to a level of activity I'm happy with, but,
Yeah.
you know so that's kind of, yeah, the two-parter.
How much kind of processing did it take for you to kind of what you just navigated and be like, all right, we might go through this again or not? Like what kind of was going on in your headspace to kind of make that decision?
Yeah, ooh, it's funny, my husband really wanted another baby, like, loved the idea of having a boy. Our first child was a girl, like, one of
Uh-huh.
each, always great. But he was like, "I don't want you to go through this again." So, like,
Yeah.
he was actually more like, "Yeah, it would be awesome, but you shouldn't do that again."
Yeah.
And for me, honestly, I was just getting to a place where I like felt comfortable in my body again, and that was,
Mhm.
3 years after having. So it took
Right.
it took me a long time. Um, but I honestly, my daughter was the one that really pushed me over the edge. She was just kind of like, she kept talking about babies and she loved like taking
Oh.
care of her little baby.
Oh.
Yeah, and just like I was like, oh, she would be such a good big sister. And I was like,
Mhm.
I don't know, I'm armed with so much more knowledge about my body, such a great team of people. All I was gonna say they're all women except my newest PT is not a woman. All women, like, super excited to try to help me navigate it.
Yeah.
And like it will be what it will be, and I
Right.
will be able to navigate it because I navigated through this. So I think that was kind of how I got to the point of like, we can try, or like
Right.
we can stop not trying, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't,
Right.
like, that's okay. And yeah, long story short, it happened fairly
Yeah.
quickly, and now we've got a 4-month-old.
Yay. No, I'm so glad you
Yeah.
said that because, quite often with and I think specifically diagnoses that involve pain or discomfort. So, like what you had with, your groin and back pain with the sacral fractures, also pelvic organ prolapse quite a bit because it's just, again, a scary, you feel something weird kind of situation. One of the first questions I always get is, um, does this mean that future pregnancies are off the table? And I love that you said, like you're s- you're in such a different place from a knowledge and understanding perspective, and I think that means a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can guarantee 100% that it's going to be a different path, but the fact that you have people around you that you trust, that whatever comes, you can kind of navigate that through. I do think that means something. I mean, talk us through the pregnancy. What did you decide to do differently this time? Just really intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I had like, everyone says, "Listen to your body," and it's like,
I hate
"Well,
that.
what if I don't speak the language my body is speaking?" Which is what happened in my first pregnancy. So, like, as a, endurance athlete, like, you have a kind of tendency to be able to ignore or downgrade pain, right,
Yes.
or discomfort, and so
Yes.
I thought I was listening to my body in the first one and, kind of not pushing through, like, I was kind of really paying attention for any pain that felt like baby in distress pain, completely ignoring my pelvis saying,
Mm,
"Hello," and like my back saying, "Hello, please stop." So I ran through most of my first pregnancy. It was never like excruciating, but it was like kind of continually there.
yeah.
And I learned kind of the hard way that I learned the language my body was speaking. Had to do some Duolingo. But no, the second time round, I was just more aware of like literally any feeling in the adductor, in the pelvic, the pelvic joint, any of my kind of hot spot places. I would just kind of stop running. So I would say I had pretty much all the same issues in my
Mhm.
second pregnancy as I did with my first. Um, but I just was able to navigate them better. So I stopped running entirely. Maybe around 16 weeks. It was
Mhm.
just kind of like I up to then I maybe there were a couple like 30-second like let's see if this can still do it. And then I
Yeah.
I will admit I did do a 800-meter, I'll use air quotes, sprint race at
I
37 weeks
remember.
pregnant. I wore like 3 support belts, but I was part of a team, man. You can't let the team down. So, but other than that, I really didn't run. I
Yeah.
also didn't really do any cross country skiing. I think I did one
Mhm.
attempt, and it really didn't feel very good. So, I just shifted to a lot more strength training,
Mhm.
some biking on a bike trainer, a little bit on a gravel bike, and just kind of, yeah, really focusing on the strength training. So I kind of viewed it as a bulk, um, a bulk phase.
Yeah. No, I think
Use
so
all that
too.
estrogen, like
Yeah.
use all that
Why
extra
not?
carbs and just build some muscle.
Was strength training in the rear view the first time around? Was that something that was on the table before, lockdown in those first couple months of pregnancy?
It was, but like I kind of always strength trained a little bit even
Mhm.
before I was pregnant as part of just my training. I just kind of
Yeah.
knew I was the kind of athlete that couldn't just always run. Like I
Right.
needed that. But I would say it was not as consistent and it was a lot
Mm.
less intentional the
Yep.
first time around. And then once COVID hit, it was like I had some equipment at home and I kind of still tried to do some things, but again,
Mhm.
I just didn't know as much about like
Right.
what my body really needed as a
Mhm.
pregnant athlete. And so I was kind of just like kind of random. Like I would look online to see, but like
Mhm.
reels weren't a thing. Like
Right.
PTs weren't really generating that much content at the time, so it was
No.
like pretty hard to find good guidance. So it was pretty sporadic, I would say, the first
Yeah.
time around.
Well, and again, too, and this is time really has no meaning anymore. And to your point, because your daughter's how old now?
She's 4.
4. Okay, right. Because I can do 2020 to 2024. I can do that math. Um, but even just exercise guidelines in pregnancy, there's been so many changes since then. And even just to your point, women talking about strength training in pregnancy, doing it, lifting weights, it was not a normal thing in 2020. It just wasn't. And good news, bad news about social media is I do think people are seeing more of that. And again, you're like, there was no reels, there was nobody I could look to for examples. It's not like YouTube was as big as it is now. And that's only 4 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like so much has changed.
Yeah.
Um, so because you were kind of a little bit more vocal after your first, there was a couple pretty high profile pieces that you put out about kind of, hey, you know, going back to things in postpartum aren't as peachy as they seem to be sometimes. Did you find that more people were following along with your second pregnancy?
I think so. Yeah. I got some yeah, like I got comments from some other women who I had a couple of women who were like similar timeline to me, and like we would
Hmm.
kind of engage throughout. And then others, yeah, who engaged like once or twice. But yeah, I would say, and that's kind of why I shared it. It's like I feel like I'm in a weird spot with social media right now because so much of it is like people do it as their job. It is not my
Yes.
job. I used to be a professional athlete, and so like still with a day job, but like so I used to have a bit more like of a online kind of motivation,
Hmm.
or a social media motivation of just like this is tied to me being a professional athlete and I have something to share. And now I've kind of switched to like, well, I'm not a professional athlete anymore. But the most engagement I got when I was a professional athlete was not from like doing well at races. It was from
Yeah.
sharing like my struggles of trying to get back to being a professional athlete after I had my
Yeah.
baby. So like I'm not an influencer. I don't know. I don't have that many followers, but like there's enough women on there engaging with
Yeah.
me and like saying like thank you for sharing this, and I'm like,
Hmm.
I might as well.
Yeah.
Not hurting anybody, and like
Yeah.
I might as well keep putting it out there. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was just nice to kind of feel like, okay, I'm putting this out there,
Hmm.
and yes, other women are like also, either having difficulties
Hmm.
after having their baby, or like also navigating a second or third pregnancy and kind of finding it to be similar but also very different. So it's just a
Right.
nice way to connect with other people who
Yeah.
have.
Well, I feel like too, there's so many more women. I feel like trail running and ultra running has just continued to explode as well. I've been paying a lot more attention probably definitely since we last, had, the podcast. And it seems like there's so many more ultra runners that are, at that stage where they're getting pregnant, having kids, trying to return back. How much interaction did you decide to have kind of with that community? Because I'm sure that was kind of like you want to talk to your friends, but at the same time too, you want to be out there and it's got to have some mixed feelings.
Yeah, I struggled with that, I will admit. Like I'm trying to rise above and like not do the comparison game, but
Yeah.
when you're in it and it's just like why, like it's totally natural to have a why me
Yeah.
kind of feeling. And even though, intellectually I know that it's not entirely my fault, a lot of it is things that
Hmm.
you can't control, and everyone's different. Like it still was really hard for me to not be able to be part of that. So I have definitely pulled back. I think a lot of that is just because I'm not racing. So I
Yeah.
did, because we'll probably get here, but I'm also not really running still, 4.5 months postpartum. I did one local race here, which was super fun and awesome to engage. And then, like I said, I went to Broken Arrow last summer. But it was weird, like to be in that, especially that event, because it's like become such a high profile elite event.
Right.
And the last time I raced there, like I was top 5 and I was one of those
Mm.
elites. And A, I'm not there anymore, and but also B, which is really cool, like the female side of the sport has just come such a long way
Right.
that like even if I was super fit, like I
Yeah.
would barely be fighting for like top 20 still probably.
Yeah.
So it's kind of it's like a dual
Yep.
side there. It's like some of it's just like the natural progression of the sport, which is awesome, but
Hmm.
there is still this aspect of like I am not where my potential like, would
Right.
allow me to be because of these issues I've been having. So
Yeah.
that is still hard for me. Like I love the community, and I love just everything about trail running, but just like um and plus with 2 kids, it's like I'm not going to really go out and volunteer at a race,
Right.
because even
Yeah.
though that's what I would do in the past. Like, I
Right.
can't run, let's go volunteer and still be part of it, but, like,
Yeah.
it's not really an option now. So I miss that part a lot. I kind of feel like a part of my heart is missing somewhere, and hopefully I'll get back there, but this season
Yeah.
of life is kind of just not about that, which I'm
Yeah.
trying to accept.
Well, and again, I think it's one of those things that there's a thread that of that you could run through most postpartum periods where there's activities or communities or things that we have to kind of step away from, and it is hard. So how do you hold that identity that may or may not still be you, and continue to kind of do the stuff that you have to do? It's this weird transition mentally, and for those of us that decide to have kids a little bit later in life, I think it's almost harder because you've been yourself for so long.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah, totally. Yeah,
I,
and I think for me it was just the, like, I chose to have the kids, but,
mhm.
like, at the time, the narrative was shifting, which was awesome,
Right.
but this is why I wrote what I wrote. The narrative was shifting to, like, kind of almost too far in the other end,
Yep.
meaning, like, you can have your baby and then go back to being winning races like 3
Mhm.
months later, because those were the stories that people
Yep.
wanted to see. So those were
Yep.
those were the stories we were seeing, and those are amazing stories. That's awesome. And having gone through it twice now, like, I cannot imagine running
Mm-mm.
a half marathon at 3 months postpartum, or,
Mm-mm.
like, running a 100-mile race and nursing the whole time at
Right.
9 months postpartum. Like,
Right.
there's some very amazing women out there doing very
Yes.
amazing things. But I think it's important to also know that there's amazing women out there not being able to do those amazing things
Mhm.
because, their body or their time or their life circumstance doesn't allow them to do that. And I think
Yeah.
that more of that will help prepare women
Mhm.
for that possibility, because I wasn't prepared for that possibility.
No,
Um,
I think you can, I mean, I think you can say that across the board in sport period with women. It was like, first, let's get a seat at the table, and then
Mhm.
we're there, we have to almost like overperform for anything. And then, okay, you're pregnant, can you still do stuff? And then come back, but we're not gonna expect any difference, and we're gonna want you to win, and then, nothing bad can happen and you can't talk about it. Like, it's
Yeah,
and now we're like, okay, we're there, we're showing up, but let's just be real about what the breadth of what that can look like. It's not all roses. And I think that helps when, you are it's impossible not to do the comparison game. But like, I
yeah,
think it's helpful to be like, you know what? That's a 1%. Like, that's not everybody, and that's okay. And
yeah,
that's okay. That doesn't mean that everything's off the table either. So
yeah, exactly.
yeah. So second pregnancy, how long did it feel like?
13 years. Oh, yeah, 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 it felt really long. I also had a very large baby, which I feel very vindicated about because, I kept like, the last month, I was, like, so uncomfortable, and my husband was
Yeah.
like, "You look like, what are you talking about? Like, you knew
No.
this was gonna happen, like, stop why." I mean, he was obviously very supportive, I'm
Right.
exaggerating a little bit. And then, my son came out, and the first thing the doctor said was, "Oh, that's a big baby." And I was like, "Great." Like, I could have
Thanks.
told you that based on how
Right?
everything feels, but
Oh my gosh, how big?
he was 8 pounds, 12 ounces. So,
And
like,
you're
not
you're tiny though.
I'm 5'2". Yeah. So, not like a ginormous 14-pounder, but, like, for
Big
my
enough.
size of, like, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it seemed from the outside, I can say this now, you never wanna hear it at the time. It did seem like you were pregnant for an awfully long time.
Yeah, it felt that way. I mean, I pop like, everyone, you pop earlier with your second pregnancy,
Oh,
or most people
yes.
do, and then,
Yeah.
again, just because of, like, my body size, it's like,
Mhm.
the fundal length is the same for everybody, but some people have much longer kind of
Yeah.
torsos, with which to carry that, and
You
mine
did
is very
not.
short. And so, yeah, I have a good friend who was pregnant. She was like 4 weeks behind me, and she's
Mhm.
like very tall. And, we were like, how are we kind of roughly the same level of pregnant? Because like, I'm like
Right?
walking around like out here, and you kind of can't even tell that she was
Yeah.
pregnant. So,
Well, and the second one, I feel, and I can only speak to that only having 2 kids that I'm aware of, like, it's one of those things that it's harder because you can't nap when you want to, your other kid
yeah,
doesn't care, and you have to go to the playground or someone's gonna die, like, it's harder.
yeah, it is definitely harder. And I was kind of more sick this time around as well, I think.
Mm,
And just like, yeah, the all of the other I got bad heartburn earlier
mm,
and just all of it. Yeah. Um, it was hard.
yeah.
Uh, but worth it.
Yeah. Well, they're adorable. That's I mean, your son is adorable. Okay, so you have your son. You're like, "All right, here we go again." What were the things that were, like the non-negotiables this time around? What was important to you?
So this time I really wanted to focus on rest and recovery as
Mhm,
much as possible after having him. So like that was kind of a thing I wanted to try to do last time, but
mhm,
she was in the NICU, it was COVID. I had to walk back and forth. So I was like
mm,
2 hours after giving birth, I was like crying in a corner because they were taking her to the NICU and having to walk like every 2 hours. It was like a fairly long walk because you couldn't just stay in there. So
mhm,
this time around I was like very minimal walking. I'm going to try the 5 5 5. So I know in Asian culture it's like, roughly a week in bed, a week
mhm,
around the bed, and then a week, or it's even 10 days, I think, like, in the house or whatever.
mhm.
That's just not feasible for me, especially with a older kid. So I was trying to
No.
do the 5 day, 5 days, 5 days, 5 days. I think I realistically did like 4 days, 4 days, 4 days,
Mhm,
but like really tried to stick to that. And my mom was here this time. So we had a little bit of help with the toddler, which helped. But like,
mhm.
so I think that was a big one. Of course, the first pediatric appointment being like on day 3 did not
Mhm.
help. I had to get up and go to that, and like
Yep.
definitely had some pelvic joint um, symptoms from just like walking around to get to the doctor,
Yep.
which was like, ah. So that was a big one. And nutrition, just like focusing on that even more. I did even more meal prep ahead of time. Like
Mhm.
last time I craved really like rich, hearty meals. So I made like beef and barley soup and like, coconut turmeric lentil soup and a lot of these like, even though it was summer, like felt very weird making all this in like 100 degrees, but like
Ah!
that's what my body wanted, so I was glad I did it. And then, I also got in to see my local PT about 3 weeks postpartum.
Mhm.
So last time around, I was like, I'll be fine." Also, it was COVID, it was, like, really hard
Right.
to get appointments. I didn't go to pelvic PT until, like, 4 months postpartum,
Mhm.
at which point a lot of stuff is kinda, like, not baked in, but it's just harder to work
Yeah.
with, right?
Mhm.
So between, Ellie here and Sarah Tanzo was also giving me some kind of remote guidance, like, I
Mhm.
had really good things I could start working on kind of not right away, but like, I don't know, 5 or 6 days in, I started, some of the, like, kind of light breathing
Yep.
exercises and just, like, connecting everything back together.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that honestly, yeah, that definitely helped for sure.
Mhm. That's one of the things that I feel like has been such for me clinically, such a big difference because for so long, we're like, "Okay, don't do anything till 6 weeks. We can't see anybody before 6 weeks," and I forget a couple years ago, I was just like, "Screw that. We're gonna start seeing people 2 to 3 weeks after the due date." And just that connection. And I was laughing because you said in the beginning, the 360-degree breathing. I still like, people talk about all that, and I have patients that come in and they're like, "Oh, I'm doing this breath." I'm like, "Do you know why you're doing it?" They're like, "No, I have no idea." And I was like and I joke around, I call it the 980-degree breath. I was just like like, start by knowing where things are not moving and have not moved for 9 months and where they need to move again, and things that are moving too much, we need to, like, share the load. Like, get those connections and get things moving again. But like I do really think that those couple of weeks, if you and it again, it doesn't have to be a big deal, but like just a little tiny bit because you had to do stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Your oldest didn't care, your son didn't care. You got to do stuff anyway. So just getting that connection just starts that ball rolling a little bit better.
For sure. And I think, what was I going to say? I had a thought and then it went away. Oh, yeah, and I think it just helps you, like, it's a time to focus on you. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, you're tired. No, you're not sleeping much. And, you know, it's just like so much is about the baby and the
Mhm.
older one if you have one, and it has to be. But like I just really felt strongly that like if I'm going to be even close to half of my best self in
Yeah.
these for my kids, like I need to take this little bit of time for myself. And
Yep.
my husband of course is very supportive of that. And it just really helped me to kind of get some reassurance to like
Yep.
3 weeks you're not doing an internal exam, but like my PT just kind of like looked around a little bit and was
Yep.
like, things are actually healing pretty well because like
Yeah.
you don't go to the OB until
Right.
6 weeks. And especially me, like both times I had tearing, right? And like stitches and stuff. And so just kind of, and like things feel weird. And like
Right.
even the second time around when you've been through it, they still feel different. And it's kind of
Yep.
like you're not very rational. So you're like, oh my God, I have like stage 4 organ prolapse. And she's like, no, like you're fine. So it's like also just getting someone who isn't completely hormonal and sleep deprived
Yes.
to like calm you down. It's like, I'm sorry to all of your profession, but
Mhm.
also thank you that like you're partially therapist a little bit of
We
just like,
are.
calm down a little bit. I've cried with Sarah like four times. So
Oh, I've got the good tissues with, like, the lotion in it. Like,
yeah.
we don't skimp on the tissues around
No,
here.
because it's so yeah. The other thing that was non-negotiable, uh, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, was
Mhm.
I started, vaginal estradiol at 5
Mm.
weeks. 5 weeks postpartum.
Yeah.
So I waited a little bit, or no, yeah, I think it was 5 weeks.
Mhm.
I waited a little bit because I was kind of, like, on the fence about the impact on milk supply.
Mhm.
I saw no impact on my milk supply
Yep.
from taking it, but I saw, like, within 2 days, I felt a difference. And then,
Yes.
a few even, like, after the 2 weeks of continuous application, it was like night and day in terms of being able to like
Yep.
access and all of the pelvic floor muscles. So
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I am a huge fan. It's funny, I about a year ago, I slammed my head into the brick wall of perimenopause, and how much I have learned from that, literally from the fire hose, I've completely has altered how I look at postpartum because they're both these very low estrogen states.
Yeah.
And we had med student Sarah Paramuter who termed genitourinary syndrome of lactation. And then, of course, friends of the show, Rachel Rubin, Dr. Ashley Winters, like they're such huge proponents for vaginal estrogen. And again, having these conversations about, it's local, it's not going to impact milk supply, which is the biggest, I think, thing. If moms can get past that, because Lord knows you work hard to get the breast milk, if you know it's not going to impact that and it can only do good things, then it's one of these really easy, low hanging fruit things to do. And it also sets up awareness for if you do decide to go off of it at some point in time, you'll need to come back on it again in another, however many years when perimenopause starts, because again, it's almost parallel this low estrogen state. And so much is that is going on is because literally once you deliver that
Yeah.
estrogen, crashes
Plummets.
down.
Yeah.
But what's so cool is that one, more people are prescribing it and you're not having to fight for it. But the other thing is we're getting, at least in the perimenopause space, we're getting more of these. They're like online telehealth companies that
Hmm.
are specifically for, hormones, vaginal estrogen, that sort of thing. So if you do live in a place where either somebody will not prescribe it to you because they're backwards, or you don't have anybody to talk to that's educated, that we're breaking down these barriers so that
Yeah.
people. It's simple. It's just really simple. Low estrogen, local, things feel better. We know it impacts the local vulvar tissues. We know that it impacts the urethra. Like so many things. It's good. Estrogen, good. Like
Yes. Yes. Tissue healing, like especially
good.
I had
Yeah.
two sets of stitches,
Yep.
like yeah, and
I'm
it's
a
just
fan.
yeah, it was great. And my doctor did prescribe it, but I didn't see her until 6 weeks, so I actually got it through Alloy ahead of time.
Oh, so you were able to do that. Awesome.
Uh-huh, yeah, so I kinda got it from both. I switched over to my doctor's prescription because this is the other fun fact, if you have somewhat decent insurance, it's
Hmm.
free if your doctor prescribes it. So,
Mm,
um, my insurance, like, is okay, it's nothing super special, so that's another thing to a plug to check if it's covered by your insurance, because then it's nice
Yeah.
you don't pay for it.
Well, and I feel like too, I have a friend, she works for a large consulting company. She found that different online companies, her company worked with one more than another or something like that. So again, insurance, that's a whole other podcast
Yeah.
that we will not dive
No,
into,
no.
because that's a shit show. But I think the short answer is that there are options, and the first thing is knowing that you need it, and then figuring out how to advocate for yourself to be able
Yeah,
to do that.
exactly.
And you know what, if you're pregnant, maybe starting to research that while you're pregnant, because in postpartum you may not have the brain cells to be able to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so we got to our 6-week point. Then what?
Yeah, I mean, I did have a bit of a like 6 weeks. I definitely started to feel just like a bit more kind of connected and tight. Like it's funny, like 6 weeks is a timeline for a reason in terms of
Mhm.
like going from feeling like completely unhinged to
Yep.
like okay, I'm kind of human again, both in terms of like sleep but also like body starting to like kind
Yeah.
of come back to life a little bit.
Yep.
um but yeah, and I started to feel like I could actually do a little bit of like strength training around 6 weeks. So I did
Mhm.
like I went from just kind of like rehab mindset to like starting to work in a little bit of like workouts is kind of
Mhm.
how I would phrase it. But I'm still really kind of like my approach for the entire fourth trimester is exercise needs to build me up, not
Mhm.
break me down.
100%.
So, like, there was a little bit of cardio, like, started to introduce a little bit of weight, but only like in the kind of way that, "Ooh, this feels good," and like
Yeah.
things are like shaking, but like I'm not exhausted. And that kind of continued all the way through 12, the whole rest of the kind of fourth trimester, as we call it.
Mhm.
And like, as most kind of recovery things, there was like, it's like a wave generally trending up, but like I would try something new or like add a little bit of intensity, and like I would get a lot of the same kind of just like what I call pelvic lock symptoms. So like for
Mm.
me, I think, I don't know, I measured my hips after pregnancy, and I had a measurement from before had my first kid. It
Yeah.
was like it was either 6 or 8 inch difference.
I
So
believe it.
some of that is a little bit of like fat on the outside, but not that much. Like it's
Yeah.
it's truly like I'm small. I had a huge baby. Like my hips had to move a lot to get that
Mhm.
baby out. And I think I really feel that through my pelvic joint. And so yeah, I just kind of have to be really careful about anything that puts pressure through the pelvis.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've been working with my pelvic ortho PT Ellie to kind of build core strength, really focusing on the deep core, the transverse abdominis, and hip strength. But like, still, my issues are all still there, right? This wasn't
Mhm.
like magically different. It's just kind of like I started trying to run a little bit later. It didn't feel very good, so I stopped. And like I think I just am able to be a little bit more patient, even though I
Mhm.
really, really, really want to run. Like just a little bit able to accept where
Yeah.
I am a little bit easier and like
Yeah.
focus on the strength training that feels good. And kind of have, I don't know that I fully have the confidence that it'll come back, because I just have these really deep seated asymmetries that are really
Mhm.
hard to break. So
Yeah. No, I think it's one of those things that, when you realize that you walked into pregnancy with stuff, then had issues because of pregnancy, because that was very much my scenario. I feel like it takes longer, and I definitely, it was, like, probably a couple years before I started to get back, and I'm doing far more now than I ever did when the kids were little, which, hopefully that's a sign of hope for you, that you will, A, have the time, and B, have the capacity. But I think it's more complicated, and it's hard to play the comparison game because, we all have different genetic backgrounds, but, you also had amazing capacity, prior to this. It's like, okay, when we get on the other side of, this, when you get that foundation built, when you're slow and intentional in building this stuff back, what's possible to create. So I think in that respect, it's got to be like terrifying and hopeful all at the same time. Is that kind of how it feels?
Yeah, that I think that's kind of how it feels. And I started working with, I don't know, this probably is like such not what a PT wants to hear, but I'm actually working with two PTs at the moment.
It happens.
Um,
Well, I was gonna ask you about it anyway because you had mentioned you're like, "Hey, I made a switch." And usually that's because and I have a couple patients like that right now that and it's funny because, I have 3 right now that are in another practice for a lot of manual stuff, but they don't do
mhm,
much exercise at all. And that's a huge part of my wheelhouse and one of my superpowers, but I also understand the manual. So it's
mhm,
not a bad thing. It's just
I know,
pulling that
yeah,
team together. So no, we're
yeah.
we're not gonna hate you.
Yeah, no, it's more that like, so Ellie is my PT here. She's ortho and pelvic, like I said. She's kind of really helpful in, she does both manual and exercise, and she's like really helping me. She knows like like recovering from pregnancy,
Yep,
and she knows my kind of asymmetries from before I was pregnant this
yep.
time. But we've been working together for a long time, and so I think like she's still really helpful in that like I saw her on Monday and she gave me like a whole new round of exercises. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is what I
Mhm.
needed. This is great. But I also kind of, yeah, Sarah recommended someone that she has worked with closely that takes a similar approach to her.
Mhm.
And he's a little further away. But, he takes like a fully global holistic view.
Yes. Yeah.
And he kind of identified some things that had actually worked well for me the first time around working with
Mm.
Sarah, in terms of like a lot of fascial
Mhm.
tension, like tension in the head and the neck, kind of
Yeah.
transitioning down the body, like organs being stuck together
Mhm.
still, and like how that affects your core.
Mhm.
And so it's like, it's kind of just another layer
Yeah.
to the treatment. That that is where, and yeah, it like unlocked some stuff, and I think it's then helping what
Yep.
my other PT's giving me be more effective.
Yep.
um but at the same time, it's like, how do I need this much like therapy to like just get to the point where I can walk without looking like, John Wayne? It's like, again, coming back to, it's like there are these women that just like have babies
I
and do a little bit
know.
of stuff, and then they're, kind of fine. But it's like, I don't know. I think there's a lot more people out there that have these like
Mhm.
lingering things that you just kind of ignore,
Mhm.
and get on with it. And it's like, no,
Well, and that's the
you should
thing
get them
that
fixed.
I think it's easier to be a mere mortal like myself that, didn't and I don't know that I have the capacity to do what you have been able to do in your lifetime. And then there's so that we're average mortals. And then there's the middle where you're like, okay, I had this capacity. Can I find my way back? And then there's the 1% where I'm just like, I don't know what
Yeah,
planet you're from,
yeah,
but you were like, I have a couple of patients like, dang, you were meant to birth children.
yeah,
And it was so easy for you. And I am so freaking jealous.
yeah.
But I also look at us mere mortals and I was like, hey, the fact that we are still alive shows that we are resilient. We are meant to be here.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
We're
We did it.
contributing somehow, right?
Yep, exactly.
Oh, that's too funny. Um, Sidebar question, because this has come up for me recently. Um, I've had quite a few, probably in the last year or so, moms that you had your first part of your first pregnancy and navigating infancy of your oldest during lockdown.
Mhm.
And now you are second pregnancy, or I'm sorry, second pregnancy and postpartum was a very different kind of thing. And I have a couple moms where they're like, okay, I don't know how to bring an infant to the grocery store because I never had to do that before. Or
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like for an infant to get sick because we were all home. My infant never got sick.
Yep.
Like, and I said, I think, anybody that had kids in that period of time, have things that they learned and, we all went through hell. But for you, what's been your experience like? How was pregnancy, and delivering not in a lockdown, and what's it been like to have, an infant and not in lockdown?
Yeah. Yeah, pregnancy was it was nice. Like we could, well, if we had a babysitter, we could go to dinner a couple times, like have a date night before second baby came. I spent I took a maternity leave the 2 weeks before I was due. I was like, I am going to relax. So I was able to get a massage. That was amazing. I got my hair cut. I got my nails done. Like, excuse me, not trying to look good for baby, but just trying to like treat
Feel
myself,
good. Yeah.
and feel good before going into what is arguably one of the hardest periods of a woman's life. So that was like I could go into the birth like a bit more relaxed, and
Mhm.
like also my mom was able to come, and so I
Mhm.
knew that, which wasn't an issue the first time because we didn't have it, but at least big kid was going to be covered and we
Yep.
had support on that side. Um, and then in terms of postpartum, and yeah, with an infant, like exactly. So my daughter brought home a cold 3 weeks. So my poor little guy got his first cold at 3 weeks, and we were like, what do we
Ugh.
do? And it was actually
Yeah.
mostly fine, but then he got another one at 3 months that was like a lot worse. And
Mm.
he was fine, is in the uh, short version here, but we ended up going to urgent care twice because it sounded like
Mhm.
he was wheezing, but it was really just phlegm in here. And we
Mhm.
kind of said both times, we're like, I know we seem like first time parents because we're like so worried, but like we
Right.
literally never had to do this with our first,
Right.
and same with the infant thing. Like, I still have not taken this one to the grocery store. I took him to like go to the post office, and I
Mhm.
felt like I had, like won a race. I was like, yes, I took
Right?
an infant out into the world and like did a task and succeeded at it, and we all survived. Like, it feels kind of monumental when you do that,
It
having
does.
like not having to have done it the first time around. So
Right.
it is weird because a lot of these ways, like, you feel like a first time parent, but like then you have
Right.
this whole other kid to worry about.
Yeah. No, I very much obviously we didn't have to navigate any of this when my kids were little, but I very much remember saying to my husband, like when he was going back to work, I was like, okay, what if I go in the grocery store and he cries? I'm like, yeah, he's gonna cry. It's okay. Like, but
Mhm.
even just the logistics of how do I bring a carrier? Where do I put the carrier? Do I put the carrier in the shopping cart? Do I like how like the logistics were mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. We we even like we both took him to Costco last or 2 weeks ago before I went
Okay.
back to work, and we were like, what do we do? Those carts are so huge. So like we just put him
Mhm.
in the stroller. I pushed the
Yep.
stroller, he pushed the cart, like it,
Yep.
but it was the whole thing of just like, what
Yes.
happens if he gets hungry? It's like he gets hungry
He
and you
gets
deal with it.
hungry.
It's like,
Right.
I know.
Exactly.
It
It's
feels
these crazy things. The one thing I forget with he taught me so much. It's cracking me up because he's 13 and a half now and literally woke up the other morning and he's looking me in the eye like he went to bed and he was not there and then he woke up and he's my height, which is freaking me out. But he I the day that I realized I was like, okay, I think we might live is I figured out how to go into a Starbucks with a stroller, order a hot drink, leave with the drink, pushing the stroller, holding the drink, getting the door open because you gotta pull it and then bump it with your butt and then get out the
Uh-huh.
door without spilling hot
Uh-huh.
drink all over your baby because you can't put it on the stroller because 'cause it'll burn your baby, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
When I did it that day, I was like, "I am amazing."
Yeah.
But you have those rhythms, but it takes a while to figure out, so I can't even imagine, like, you've got, a toddler into the world, you've got a big kid, 4-year-old into the world, and you're like, "Wait, I don't know how to do this other stuff."
Well, yeah, I mean, like, so he, our daycare, we're kind of keeping him home for this few months, and then my husband's
Mhm.
going to take his leave in January. But I have to go on a work trip in November, and so we
Mm.
we like had to find care for him. We don't have
Yeah.
grandparents locally, and like we went. It was a personal reference, which is always good. But like we went there, and I was like, I don't know what questions to ask you
Right.
because my daughter was 2 when she went to daycare for the first time. So like
Right.
I can't even think of the things I would
Right.
want to know about in terms of caring for an infant because we did it all. Like,
Right.
so it was just like,
Right.
yeah. So yes, it is a weird thing. But I will say, I think, and you had slightly older kids during COVID, so interested to hear your take here, but like it was really freaking hard to have a baby in
Mhm.
COVID.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think of all of the ages of any kid, I
Mhm.
think that was the easiest because they didn't like, it was the best outcome for them because we
Yeah.
were there for them the whole time. They didn't get exposed, like they didn't get sick.
Yeah.
They didn't miss out on anything
Yep.
because like they wouldn't have been doing anything anyway. Like anything like older than 2, I feel like
Yeah.
maybe 4 is the age, I don't know, around there where you start to like miss out on those like social
Yeah.
developmental engagements, like
Yeah.
all come with their own challenges. So it's
Yeah.
like in some ways it's like, yeah, I would have much rather have had a baby with some support and like
Yeah.
access to healthcare, but of all of the ages, I feels like it was
Right.
kind of the easiest.
I mean, mine were in first and third. And that initial, I guess they were like home. There really wasn't much school. Um, I think it was like March 13th, not it's burned into my brain or anything until the end of school. That was a little weird because there wasn't a lot of structure. But then like later on that summer, um, like they still had a version of a swim team that summer. So they still had some
Mm,
interaction. And then in the
yeah,
fall,
that's good.
they did versions of like rec sports. So they still had like softball and baseball. And we kept them home and did virtual for a year. So they had some interaction, that kind of stuff. And they did have these little, sports things that we were able to do. So again, I
That's good.
it could have been harder, it could have been worse. But again, like what you just said, like I feel like any age stage, it was just to me also it made elementary school go so much quicker. This year we've got both are in middle school. So we finished up with elementary school last year. And I think it just sped it all up.
Mhm.
Because again, those years were a blur.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's a tricky one. I don't know because
I think it depends on where you were too, because we were in
Mhm.
like the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area at the time,
Right.
which was just really just,
Yeah.
restrictive. And so
Yeah.
my step nephew and niece, is that what they are?
Mhm.
I guess. Yeah. They were about that age and
Mhm.
just like there wasn't anything. So it was just
Yeah.
like
Well,
it seemed
also,
like a lot
like,
harder.
if you were in Florida, like and there were a lot
Yeah.
of other states that, like, just didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no,
Which has
I
its
to your
own
point, like,
problems.
I think there was definitely some different geographical, variations there.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, I will say that, like, I think it's so important when you're talking to, and kind of considering a mom's experience, like, there's so many layers to it.
Mhm.
And it's such an expanse, because you have that experience, you have your, you know, ultra experience and trail experience prior to getting pregnant. And then you have like you have so many different experiences, and then we're trying to navigate all those parts and pieces and then make something of it moving forward. And, the one thing that I will, say about kind of raising kids during that time and what my kids have taken from that is they were old enough that I think they've developed a real sense of resilience, which I wish they'd never had to learn.
Yeah.
I think I developed some resilience that I wish I would never have had to learn. And so now it's how do we use that moving forward and what does that look like and so on. So,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
no. So looking forward, you're back to work.
I'm back at work. This is my second week. Yeah.
Okay, how's it going? Because those first couple weeks are rough.
Yeah, it's going. I work remotely for the most part, so it's kind of weird to be like still in my house all the time. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's going. I'm fortunate enough that I have I'm just doing 4 days a week
Hmm.
through the end of this year, and then
That's nice.
um yeah, we live in a state where my husband gets 12 weeks of fully paid leave as
That's
well,
nice
or
too.
partially paid leave, I don't know. So he'll take that in
Mhm.
January. Yeah, I'm back at work. We've had to schedule like every minute of our days in order for both of us to get exercise
Yeah.
6 days a week,
Mhm.
which is a huge priority for us, while also still, dealing with the toddler and the
Yeah.
baby. So that has kind of forced, there's like anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour of exercise 6 days a week, which
Mhm.
is way less than I used to do, but it's kind of essential for both of us really to
Yep.
like be able to then handle the rest of the
Right.
day.
Yeah.
So
Do you feel like, you might wax up the cross country skis this winter?
definitely.
Good.
It might be snowing in the mountains right now.
Ooh,
It's probably
yay.
still a little early, but
Okay.
yes, I am really hopeful that I can get the hips and pelvis kind of sorted
Mhm.
out to the point where I can get back to that, because it's so fun and it's so pretty. And I
It
didn't get to do it
is.
last year, and um, Yes, that's a big one
It's
that I
it's
would like to
so
go.
good too. It's so total body,
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
insanity. Love it.
yeah.
Has your husband gotten into it or no?
He has.
Okay.
I got him a set of skis like 2 Christmases ago, and then
Mhm.
last Christmas, I got him skate skiing lessons because classic skiing you can kind of figure out.
Mhm.
Some
Skate takes a
people
little
can,
time. Yep.
yeah, some people can figure out skate skiing, but
Yep.
it seemed like lessons would speed that up. So I was super jealous because he and our
Mm.
friends would go out every Saturday afternoon and do lessons. I was like, and I was pregnant and I couldn't
Oh
do
my
it
gosh.
because I fall. So like I would have gone downhill skiing. Actually, did I go? No. I would have gone downhill skiing over cross country skiing while pregnant because I fall more while cross country skiing, which
I
just not
okay.
I'm just not used to the skinny skis. Let's just
Well, yeah, it depends on what you start on. I started on cross country skis and
Okay.
then because that was in high school, and then I didn't learn downhill till after
Okay.
PT school. So
Yeah.
I think that's a little easier when you learn on the skinny.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
especially learning skate skiing, like
it
I
it
think I would
takes a
probably
little
fall.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes a little bit, but, so the next question is, have you purchased a sled for your husband to pull to put the kids in?
I haven't. We do have like a little bike chariot,
Okay.
but it was a gift. It was free. It was
Mhm.
like a free kind of thing that someone had extra, so it doesn't have the changeable from
Okay.
wheels to skis.
Okay.
Um, I that would be super fun, and the baby would be 6 months old by the time we'd want to be
Mhm.
doing that. So
Christmas present.
I know maybe I
I'm
think.
gonna li it's this is selfish because I'm gonna try and vicariously live through you and your trips out there, so I'm like, "No, go do this, I
Go
wanna
get
see
it.
it."
I know. We should. I did put my 4-year-old in, ski school,
Oh my
this
gosh.
winter, so she's gonna start little downhill
Yay.
skiing,
What's
which,
the closest mountain for you guys?
Mount Bachelor,
Okay.
although it's, like, being sold, I don't know. I don't know what's
Oh,
going on with it. Its ownership status is
gotcha.
unclear, so
They
we'll
have
see what happens, but
they have a decent Nordic center up there,
they
yes?
do. They have a
Yeah.
really good Nordic Center. I think a lot of athletes come here to train at the Nordic
Mhm.
Center.
Yep.
And then we also have this really great free, um, smaller scale, but still like 40 kilometers of trails.
That's
Nordic
great.
Center that is donation based. So it's
Mhm.
not free, but you
Yeah.
give $100 or something at the beginning of the season, a hundred
Oh my
bucks at the end of the
gosh.
season, like you're good. Um, and it's like closer to town, so the
Okay.
snow is less certain, but once
Mhm.
it's winter it's got
It's good.
snow,
Yeah.
and it's easy. I've done it in the morning before work before, like
Oh
I'd
my
gotten to that
god.
routine 2 years ago, so I'm hoping to do that again.
You're like a
Like
tourist
one day a week.
advertisement right now. I was like, "I'm going to move to Bend."
Well, we just had like 4 months of smoke, so I don't know.
No, that's
Not
yeah,
to
no, I
not
noticed
to
that. Yeah, I know. There's no
yeah,
good news, bad news thing. Well,
yeah.
thank you for keeping it out there. I guess it was last summer, we got it was I forget what part of
Oh
Canada
yeah,
it was from that it came
yeah.
here to the
Last
East
summer.
Coast, and
Hmm.
so we had it
No fun.
too. But yeah, that's, the world falling apart. We'll save that for a different podcast
Yes,
too.
yes.
So you've got good winter plans, which I'm excited for you to have that, and hopefully you'll have some good snow and can get out a little bit and
Yes,
whatnot. So that'll be good.
yes. Yep.
All right. Well, at the end of every episode, and this is different since you were on,
Ooh,
we ask a
okay.
couple questions. The
Okay.
first one you may not have an answer for, or it might be Goodnight Moon. So book you're reading or podcast that you're listening to right now.
I'm theoretically reading a book by Tanya French. So she does like Irish crime
Ooh.
books.
Okay.
And but I've been reading it for like 6 months. So that's why I
Okay.
say I'm theoretically reading it. It is on my bedside table and
It
I have my
counts.
place marked. But that is where I am. I am
Okay.
sadly not consuming much content these days.
The bigger question is, what's your daughter reading right now? What's her book of choice?
She loves Peanut Goes for Gold,
Mm,
which
I
is
don't know that one.
by Jonathan Van Ness, from Queer Eye,
Okay.
and it's about a hamster that does things their own way, and it's adorable, and she
Do you
loves it.
have it memorized?
Pretty much.
Yeah. There was all those little, like, board books that like, The Hippo Goes Berserk and that kinda
Yep,
stuff, like, I could recite those in my sleep at a
yep.
certain point.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yeah.
they sometimes I dream in kids' books. It's horrifying, actually.
The thing when they get older, or at least my kids do, it drives me nuts, they do this with movies too, is they read the same book over and over and over again.
Mhm.
and then
She
they
does
watch
that with
the
movies.
same
Yep.
movie
Yeah.
over and over again. And they're like, "Movie night, let's watch this." I'm like, "We've watched
Yep.
that 7 times."
Yep. That's where we are.
Um,
If I
but
can sneak in a new one, it's like, yes.
well, it just translates into I fall asleep. So, like, last night, my husband's out of town, and my son's like, "Let's watch Space Jam," and it's the new one with LeBron James. Um, and I had not seen it, and I would like to go back and watch it because it did look cute, but I'm like, "No, we are not." It's just from it's like 7:30, I'm closing my eyes. So thanks for that nap opportunity.
Yeah.
All right, favorite activity since becoming a mom, and it doesn't have to involve your kids.
Um, that's a good question. I mean, I do really enjoy like river hikes as a family. They're very slow. We don't make it very far, but it is not an athletic pursuit by any means, but
Yeah.
it forces you to see things through a different lens because especially once now that she's 4, it's
Yeah.
like she's pointing out things and she gets excited about things that I didn't even notice. So that kind of
Right.
stuff is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And especially because it's outside. It's a different way to
Right.
experience nature.
Yeah. And she'll go to kindergarten next year?
Yes. Yeah, she's in preschool
Okay.
right now.
All right. Yeah, then they really notice things.
Yeah.
One piece of advice for moms.
Oh man. I'm gonna trust yourself. So this is not listen to your body because again, you may not always know what it's saying, but
Mm,
like, I don't know, trust yourself and advocate for yourself. Like, yes, there are a lot of experts out there and you definitely probably need support of some variety of professionals to support you in your kind of postpartum journey, but no one knows you and your body the way you know you and your body. So, like, don't feel weird describing something that you're feeling, even if it might feel small, because it's like if it feels weird to you, chances
yeah,
are it's important. So it's kind of, yeah, just like really advocate for yourself and trust yourself.
I like that. And then I think to piggyback on that, you've been really good about letting the people who help you evolve and kind of progressing and being like, okay, this person is what I needed in this moment, and then moving on. And sometimes that's okay too.
Hmm.
Getting what you need and trusting yourself that like what you need right now is something that's a little bit different, which I think
Hmm.
that's important too.
Hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um, this is I don't know if this would I mean, is anybody got your attention right now? In postpartum space or ultra space or anything like that?
Um, I have shifted. Well, I'm postpartum, but I'm also pretty strong suspicion that I'm also perimenopause.
You saw
Um,
that word menopause up there. You're like, oh well, we're talking about that
yeah, so
too.
like that's kind of what I've been focusing on, honestly.
Yeah.
So like uh Dr. Abby in
Hmm.
New York, she is a postpartum well, she's just a pelvic PT.
Oh, Abby Bales. Yep.
Yes, Abby
Mhm.
Bales.
Yep, she's been on the show.
And like
Yep,
she's like really focused on that cross connection too, which
yep.
I think is, and I just like the way she presents stuff, and she's
Yeah,
she's awesome. And then I think this one is probably not, I think everyone knows who's paying attention to menopause knows about Dr. Mary Claire Haver.
yep.
Like she's kind of the main person I've been
Yeah,
following, and hers is very menopause and perimenopause focused.
yeah.
But I think it's a good thing to be aware of, if you're kind of in that late 30s, early 40s,
Mhm.
because like I don't know, yeah, like my ears ring sometimes, and I have like all of these little things where, or like feel a little dizzy, feel a little nauseous. It's like
Yeah.
all of these things that I think women have just been like sweeping under the rug for
Right.
all time. Basically, we're
Yeah,
now learning like of the like 97 different symptoms
right.
of perimenopause. And so I
Yeah.
think just being aware of that, even if you're not there yet, like
Mhm.
will set you up to get like nip it in the bud when you start
Yeah.
to feel some things.
Well, I think too, and in the DC area, I always tell people, I'm like, my average postpartum first-time mom is like 38 to 42, which I know that's not that way everywhere, but there's not a lot of time.
Yeah.
If you're talking average age of menopause at 51, menopause or perimenopause can last 10 years, like that's backing it up. And then of course,
Hmm.
so many IVF moms,
Hmm.
because they had primary and ovarian insufficiency, had difficulty conceiving, and then get on the other side of that, and then they're in early perimenopause, like
Mhm.
there's so much. You're probably resonating a lot too, because these are two low estrogen states. Like you're
Mhm.
just coming out of this very low estrogen state. And because, I'm assuming, lactation, that kind of stuff too, like they're parallels. And when I
Mhm.
dove headfirst into perimenopause, I was like, oh my gosh, we need to be having these same conversations
Mhm.
and postpartum. And that I think that's probably why that's resonating so much for you, because
Mhm.
it's just so much parallels. So good on you
Mhm.
for doing a little early reading.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, last one here. What does it mean for you to be an active mom?
Oh, um, that's a good question. I mean, I think this is probably a really generic answer, but it's honestly like any way of moving your body.
Yeah.
And like even if it's not getting back to or picking up the same types of things that you did before you were a mom, it's just kind of like if being active and moving your body is really important to you,
Mhm.
finding the way to do that that works for you in the different stages
Yeah.
of postpartum, because postpartum is forever.
Yep.
So there might be, and just kind of navigating that.
Yeah.
It's like you're actively involved in that process while
Mhm.
being physically active.
I love that. That was very comprehensive and well said. Thank you. Nicely done. Nice.
And I will attribute that to the fact that I started taking creatine, because let me tell you, like
Okay.
3 weeks ago, my brain was complete mush, and I
Okay.
could not articulate anything. So that's
There's
my other.
a lot more conversations about creatine. I'm still I have a friend who she's like the human PubMed. So I just need to like pick her brain a little bit and be like, all right, tell me what studies I need to dive into that are relevant, and I've got to figure out where that fits into my life. So thank you for the reminder.
Yes.
All right. If you want to know more about Amy and her postpartum journey, round two, you can follow her on Instagram, Amy_the_Punisher. Thanks so much, Amy, for coming
Yeah.
back and giving us an update. And I think you're just such a lovely person. And, I appreciate that you've been so open and vulnerable about sharing this journey. And I know so many women have, felt validated just being like, hey, somebody else is going through shit like I am, and just taking their time with it. So thank you for taking the time and the courage to share your story.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for all of your online digital support over the years. At this point, it's been years. I feel like we need to figure out how
I
how we're
know.
going to meet at some point.
I
Going to
have a
be like,
huge list right now. I
yeah,
have
I'm
a very
sure.
big list, and there's a big chunk of it. If you want to go on the Nordic ski list, we can add you to
Mm,
that too, because there's a lot of us that could meet up on the trail. But we'll get you that skiing lesson
yep,
early.
and then
Like,
we'll figure it out. Yeah.
all good. All right, thanks so
Okay.
much for being on this.
Thank you. Bye.
Did you enjoy the podcast? If so, leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and tell a friend to do the same. Are you a postpartum mom or postpartum pro wanting to know more about getting back to running after baby? Check out all my free goodies on carriepagliano.com. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Carrie Pagliano and her guests to the show. The content should not be taken as medical advice and is for entertainment purposes only. Always consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions.